Hi, Cherie. You are
Yep,
definitely muted. There you are.
there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent. So we're just going to start in just about a minute as our participants start to join in. I know we already have about 64, 65 participants joining. So just a few more moments. We'll give them about a minute or so. But hopefully you all have been having a wonderful day so far. We are very excited to have all of you. This is what we do every third Wednesday of the month. So every third Wednesday of the month. So you guys will get a chance to hear from a Biogen scientist, someone who works at Biogen, or someone we are constantly in communication with, just to kind of share their perspective with us. So we're very happy to have you guys join us. So feel free to message us if you'd like. Feel free to say hello and all that. If you're also telling us where you're from, I think Amanda's over there typing in the chat, telling everyone, tell us where you're from so we can kind of get a good grasp of where the educators are coming from. Tell us if you're a student. Tell us if you're an educator, or if you're even an employee at Biogen. We'd be happy to hear from all of you. I'm seeing student, I'm seeing North Carolina, Massachusetts, North Carolina, even more North Carolina, man, okay. We got one from Georgia. This is awesome. Okay, this is great. Wow, the list keeps going if you're seeing in the chat, guys. So this is great. All right, so I think we should be at about capacity. So let's get started. So my name is Alazar. I have the honor of hosting this series today with Dr. Cherie Butts, who will be joining us. She is, hold on one second, let me move my slide over so I can advance. So she is the medical director and head of clinical assessment and digital and quantitative medicine. Cherie comes to us not just as a colleague, but also as a mentor to myself and to many of us in the community lab. And she definitely has this love for young people and definitely this love for addressing how we can all become better. And I think today's topic is a very wonderful thing to kind of kickstart alongside with what's been going on, just across the globe. But more importantly, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day. So why being different makes science better? Absolutely love that title. When she told me that this is what she was going to talk about, I think every single one of us in the community lab jumped off at it. Alex definitely laughed. I know Amanda was giving me the biggest thumbs up ever. So all my colleagues on the call, I know you guys were in full support of this particular topic. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cherie, just to kind of give us a little bit of briefing, and hopefully you can hear us, and we'll get going.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. This is a real pleasure for me. I completely agree, Alazar. I do love talking with the next generation. What is important to me is I cannot read minds. What's important to me is to have an understanding of what exactly you would like to get out of this session. And so rather than me guessing and talking about a bunch of random things, what I'd like to ask our students especially, but maybe even the Biogen employees who are here, if you would put into the chat, what is the kind of information that you would like to get from this session? Because I want to make sure that I talk on those particular topics. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey and some things that are near and dear to my heart in terms of not just science, but how I operate in science. But I do want to hear from the audience in terms of what would you like to hear. So I see some things, but I want to make sure that I give enough time for people to maybe put in some comments, and then that will allow me to have that in mind as I talk through my story. And then maybe Alazar, if you're starting to see some themes, you can sort of call them out to me, and then I'll make sure that I comment on that.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a very cool one, which is how many women are in your job or in your field of expertise? I think that's a really powerful one. I think I knew you were going to go to that direction one way or another. So I think that's a very important one. I have a question on what is digital and quantitative medicine. I think that's a very important question to address as well. A student also asks, what are types of careers at Biogen and how do I prepare for them as a person, and what can I actually do to get there? Someone said biology, just general biology. I think that's a very cool topic to start off with even. Let's see. Well, someone wrote science. So I think the constant theme here is definitely going to be related to that. So.
Sounds good. Okay, then with that in mind, if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey.
Excellent. Okay. But before I go, if I may, and this is
Okay.
obviously, an amateur host on the call here. So I forgot to introduce Stephanie Couch, who is the executive director of the Lemelson MIT, who sponsors and really also is there to support us throughout this entire process. So when you guys were joining us, I know you guys were seeing the web link where it said Lemelson MIT and Community Lab. So we're very excited for you guys to have seen that, but obviously giving that recognition to you as well, Steph. So let's go to the next slide here for you.
All right, so what I'd like to talk through is my personal journey on my way to Biogen, and why this figure looks the way it does. As many of my Biogen colleagues know, I grew up in Texas, and that's a very important part of my story. And I went to a high school that focused on medical professions. And something that I probably should say up front is being different has been a part of my story for a very long time. I went to Montessori school, which is still in existence, and the way that Montessori school works is you don't have sort of one version of doing things. It's more like you as a student have your own potential, and we should maximize that potential. And so that was the first. Until about fourth grade, I was in the Montessori system. And so that really did foster how I think, and the fact that I'm not used to this conformed version of doing things, but rather taking the journey that makes sense for me, even though the students next to me to the right and to the left may be taking a different journey. So that was a normal part of it. Once I got to fourth grade, I went to what I call now regular school. And so that was a very big learning curve for me, because I was used to not sitting in a desk, but sort of operating in a very open space and doing what made sense for me and what I wanted to work on that day. And then you change to a system where everybody's doing the exact same thing together. And that for my teachers was a bit of I will say it was a bit of a challenge, because the way that I had learned up to that point was so different that they recognized that I was actually a little bit more advanced. And so I would get through material quite quickly, and then I would be sitting there and bored. And when you're bored, you get into trouble. And so the teachers had to figure out how to keep me busy beyond doing the traditional work. And that theme sort of resonates probably throughout my entire life. So as I was graduating high school, which was focused on medical professions. And I will say that in 8th grade, the way the program works in Fort Worth is in 8th grade, they test all of us and they say, okay, you qualify to be in, X programs. And so one of them was engineering, which I really wanted to do. And so they introduce us and they say, okay, this is going to be your program. But the one thing that I noticed was everybody that was going to the engineering school was a boy, and that was not a very comfortable idea for me, because I didn't want to be the only girl in this program. And so ironically, I picked medical professions because I saw more people who looked like me, or at least were female. And so I felt more comfortable, and I realized that ended up being a theme for me, is that I always wanted to fit in, even though everywhere I went, I was different. And so it probably took the first part of my life to recognize that I was fighting against being different. And then the second part of my life to realize, you know what, maybe it's okay to be different. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about why that moment was so important, and who made that moment, made that shift for me. So I went to college in Baltimore. And the reason why I went to this particular college, Johns Hopkins, was it was very well known for science and medicine. And that was the road that I thought I wanted to go down. And I will say that in high school, I was introduced to both working in a clinic, working with physicians, and also working with scientists in the laboratory. And so for a large part of my story, I was told that people who look like me, you know, Black people. They could be physicians, but there weren't really that many scientists. And so I probably should lean toward being a nurse or a doctor or something, because, you know, that was something that was more acceptable, or at least there were people who looked like me who were doing it. And so that made sense. So I went to Hopkins, and this was a really good opportunity for me, because here there were a lot of people who were really smart. And so it wasn't an anomaly to be at the top of your class. It was more like everybody had been at the top of their class. So that was I felt like I was part of a community that made sense for me. So that was a really important moment in my trajectory. And as I was finishing college, my friends who were all science majors were all going to medical school. And I had been doing both research in the laboratory and research in the clinic. And I realized that I'd liked the lab research more than I liked the clinic research. And so I told them, I don't think I want to be a doctor. I think I want to be a scientist. And I will tell you, that was a very important moment for me, because nobody wanted me to be a scientist. They all wanted me to be a doctor. And so that was the moment in my life where I had to say, I'm so sorry, I'm not going to do what my family and my friends want. I'm going to do what I want. And that also would become a very important moment for me for the rest of my career as well. So I did I did get my PhD instead of my MD, which is what all my friends who were in science did. And I went to the National Institutes of Health to do additional training, which was also really great for me, because it was a scientific candy store. And so I really thrived in that situation. And then I went to the Food and Drug Administration, which I'm sure all of you who hear these stories about the vaccine, you hear that story all the time. And so that was another part of my journey, is that I went to the Food and Drug Administration. And I will tell you, at each of these places, I am one of the few people who looks like me, and one of the few who's Black, one of the few who's women. And again, you know, as a scientist, you spend a lot of energy trying to fit in, trying to prove that you can do what everybody else can do. And so I'm still struggling with this whole idea of being different. So I did do drug review. I know exactly what it takes to get an approved drug. And then I decided, I think I want to do something else. And I got a call to come to Biogen. And so that was an important call, because what you will notice is Fort Worth is in the South, Baltimore is in the South, the NIH is in the South, the FDA is in the South, but Biogen is in the North. And so this became a geography problem for me, because I'm not really used to living in the cold. And in my head, I said, okay, I'm going to go to Biogen and do this thing, but I'm not going to do it for very long, because I don't like cold weather. And so culturally, it's probably going to be far too different for me. And then I'll come back, and I can come back to FDA, or I can come back to NIH. But what I found at Biogen was a completely new world for me. And I think one of the most pivotal moments was participating in this program that talked about being different, and talked about why it's so important to be different, and talked about the value of being different. And it really changed everything about me. It changed everything about how I was thinking. It changed what kind of impact I wanted to have. And I will say that was a really important piece. And that's why I'm still at Biogen, because they've been very good at allowing me to come up with these new ideas and explore them and see where they can go, which is something I had done in the government, something I had done at Hopkins, but it's on a much bigger scale at Biogen, because we're not simply working in the laboratory, but we're thinking about what is it that we do that's going to be helping patients. I mean, that's real life. I mean, the medicines that your parents or your grandparents or your cousins might be taking, to know that you're part of how that drug came to be, that's such a big deal. And another part of that, as Alizar was saying, was health equity. So, you know, as I said before, pretty much everywhere I've gone, I've been either the only African-American, sometimes the only female. And so sort of, you get used to that idea, although it's still very isolating. It's not something that I necessarily enjoyed, but I accepted it. But having done laboratory research, having worked on clinical trials, having the experience with what does it take for a drug to get approved, and knowing basically all of those pieces, now that no matter what color or gender you are, that is a very rare set of skills. So I've been exposed to things that very few people around the world have been. And so that's where health equity became important to me, because here was an opportunity for me to take my science and to be able to apply it and to be able to help my community. That was a really big deal. And so that's why I really love the health equity work, because I get to help my own community. I get to think about what does it take in order to make sure that everyone has the best opportunity to get access to the therapies, to understand what the therapies are doing for them. And so for me, I feel very fulfilled right now in the work that I'm doing. But I will say that if you go to the next slide, part of the journey is not simply having a career, but it's who you surround yourself with, right? And so what I wanted to show in this slide are, some, just a fraction of the people in my life. Some of them are Biogen employees, and then my son's in the middle, and also the importance of having fun. So something that I will tell you that my friends from junior high school all the way up, my friends were a pivotal part of who I became. And, as I mentioned, having gone to Montessori school where you're sort of thinking about things very differently, it made me stand out. And so for a large part of my middle school and high school, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like everybody else. And I was always embarrassed when I would get awards, which sounds ridiculous, but if it happens to you enough times where you get pulled out of class and your name gets called, it becomes a very uncomfortable thing, because you really want everybody else to have the same shot. But I will tell you, there was a moment in high school, there was a moment in college, and there was a moment since college where my friends in high school, this very important point, my friends in high school sat me down and they said, listen, we know that you're smart and it's okay that you're smart. And actually, we're very proud of you for all of the things that you do. And the fact that we can brag about having a friend who does the things that you do, that makes us even happier. And so for me, that was an important message, because now I didn't have to feel uncomfortable about doing well, about getting awards, about trying to do things that were different. And something very similar happened in college as well, where I was, sort of trying to do what everybody else was doing. And my friends were like, you're just not like that. Like, you need to accept that you're very different, and it's perfectly okay. We're not going to be less of your friend. We actually celebrate that about you. And so that those two moments, and then my father was also the same way, where he would say, look, you know things, you're very smart, you can catch on very quickly, and there's nothing wrong with that. So there were these people in my life who really made it okay for me to be smart, okay for me to be ambitious, okay for me to want to be impactful. And that, I will tell you, if I had had the opposite, if anyone ever discouraged me, I would have not done most of the things that I've already done. And I will tell you that it's also been at Biogen the same way, where I've been encouraged to fly as high as I wanted to. And that to me has been very important, because when you have people who want you to do well, that speaks volumes, and that really does make you want to do more. And it's not just that you want to do more for yourself, you actually want to do more for them. You want to make them proud. You want to be impactful to your community. And that to me really drives a lot of what I do today. And so what I have here are like my many different friends, which you can see I have a very multicultural life. And so I have friends who, this one picture that is in the top right, not the top where I went snow sledding, but the one next to that. Okay, so this was where my mentees, those who I am now advising, they encouraged me to go on a trip with them to Costa Rica. And I love to zip line. So that's where you see, like in the middle where my son and I would do this pretty regularly. And so they said, okay, we're gonna go zip lining. And I said, okay, that's fine. So the way that it works in Costa Rica is you get on the bus and you go up the hill, and they tell you when you get to the top that, you know, at some point you can't go back. And I was like, okay, fine, I've done zip lining before. But what I did not know was that there was this Superman zip line. And so we were 80 stories above ground, and I am scared of heights. So I will tell you that part of the importance of my friends has been that they pushed me beyond my comfort zone. And I will tell you, I was sweating so hard, I looked like I was crying, but I actually really enjoyed it. 80 stories, I will never do that again. But it was a very important moment to recognize that it's been my friends and my family and my sponsors and my mentors who really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And that allowed me to do more than I ever could. And I will say that my mentors and sponsors and advocates, whatever word you want to use, they really have seen in me what more than I've seen in myself. And that's also allowed me to push farther than I would have normally thought if I thought about what I could do. So with that, I'm done with my story, and I want to answer as many questions as possible.
Excellent. So I definitely got some questions for you because some of these students have been just throwing questions at me in the middle. Okay. But I do want to make a point of correction if that's okay, Cherie. I think when you said Biogen, some of these students know Biogen is North Carolina. Like we can't forget that, right? Some of these students are in North Carolina. So they're like, cold. It doesn't get that cold, does it? So we do have two offices. We have a manufacturing facility down in North Carolina. So for the students who know Biogen through Amanda and Alex, we know that we have that up there down in North Carolina. And we have one up here in Massachusetts as well. So we definitely have two very amazing facilities. A big bulk of our research and development at Biogen is done here in Massachusetts, and our manufacturing of therapies and quality control is done in North Carolina. So just wanted to throw that out there. So question one. Cherie, can you please explain the difference between clinical research and lab research?
Yes. Oh, that's a really good question. So I didn't know either. So laboratory research is picking up a pipette, working under the hood, looking at cells, maybe collecting samples from a clinical trial and working with them and digesting them and trying to see how the individual cells work, versus clinical research where you're actually working with humans. It's very, don't get me wrong, animal research, laboratory research, working with cells has it's a little bit scary because you want to do it right, but clinical research is with humans. And so you can imagine that's a lot scarier because you definitely do not want to mess that up. And so clinical research, and this is an important point that you guys have probably seen in the news with vaccines, you have to run a clinical trial in order to test that a drug or a vaccine does what it's supposed to do. And so that's the work that I do now, is really evaluating in humans, how do these therapies work? How does this measurement of how someone is doing work? But I will tell you that it's very satisfying, but it is also very scary because you want to make sure you do everything right because you know that it can impact someone someday if you don't.
And I think maybe this can also be a clarifying question to address both the clinical trial and the lab experiment or the research in the lab kind of component, which is really where does it kind of fall into as these students are kind of directed in classrooms, which is through the scientific method, right? So asking the question, coming up with the results, and those very, I forget what the acronym that they use were, but coming to that conclusion. Where does the clinical trial and the animal research and then also the benchtop research kind of stop? And where does the other end? And kind of how does that kind of process help students? So like, how can we help students understand a little bit of which one comes first? And how do we kind of get to the FDA? I think that's a very important kind of piece to put together for them.
Okay, so that's you're right. That's a good one. And that really does speak to all of the experiences. So this is how I see it. And Alizar, please do clarify anything that may be a little bit confusing. So number one is you have an idea. And so you say to yourself, I think that I could maybe help people who have, let's say, multiple sclerosis by addressing a specific pathway, biological pathway, and then I think that that will help patients do better. So that's conceptually the idea. So you have this idea, you think you want to target a certain receptor, protein, some kind of enzyme, something like that. And so you'll do those initial laboratory assays. So those can be with cells, not necessarily with animals, but with cells, to see if this protein does make sense. You will then move into an animal model that's relevant for that disease, and then you will try to manipulate that particular protein and see if it has an impact on the disease outcome in the animal. And then what you will do is you will say, okay, I think that this makes sense. And what you will have, and this was like my chemistry degree from college, is you will try to make a drug, which could be, different kinds. I'm sure you've seen some people will inject, some people will take a pill. So you'll try to figure out what kind of drug would be appropriate in order to manipulate this particular protein, and then again, give it to people. So then you will have done your animal model work, you will have done your cell work, you will have generated a drug candidate, and then you will determine whether or not it should go into people. Now, I will tell you the number one, I cannot overemphasize this, the number one most important aspect is safety. Because if a drug is not safe, it doesn't matter if someone is cured because they'll be too sick. So you have to, at every single step along the way, make sure that it's safe. And once you determine that it's safe enough and you evaluate it in animals, you evaluate it in cells, then you say, okay, I think we're ready to put this in people. And the first clinical trial that you do is always for safety. And then the next clinical trial you do is to see how does it impact people who have the disease. And then the third clinical trial, the phase 3 that you probably hear a lot about, is where you have a large number of people that participate in a trial to see more broadly, not just a few hundred people, but maybe more broadly, does this have the same outcome with people's disease when they get this drug? And then you present it to the FDA and you say, we believe that this will be beneficial to people who have this particular disease. We've seen the safety profile. These are the side effects that we would expect. Will you please approve it?
That was perfect. I couldn't have asked for even, I don't need to clarify, do I? I don't think I do. So I have a good question from an anonymous attendee. I think this person in particular is interested in Johns Hopkins. So the student writes, I'm thinking of becoming a biomedical engineer and also planning on attending Johns Hopkins. What would you say is a good path to follow in high school for that question?
So I will tell you, Hopkins is one of those places where you can, very similar to my experience at NIH and FDA and even at Biogen, you can be anything. That we actually had a lot of art majors who ended up becoming physicians. And so Hopkins is one of those places where you can be whatever major you want to be, but then you take the classes that you want. So as long as you take those classes that are relevant to your major, you can take all these other classes. Some people do take the biomedical engineering course curriculum because there are a lot of classes that are involved, but some people, in fact, take some biomedical engineering classes, but that wasn't their major, and then they go on to graduate school and they become a biomedical engineer. So I don't want you to feel like you have to major in biomedical engineering in order to become a biomedical engineer. You have to make sure you take the right classes. Does that help?
I think it does. Now, someone mentions that they saw the image with the brain and the adrenal gland on a previous slide. Why did you include those images?
Oh, yes, I didn't get to talk about my research. So thank you for bringing that back. The research that I did when I was at Hopkins, when I was in graduate school, was focused on understanding how hormones affect the immune system. And I will tell you that this was yet another moment where I was different, because most people who study the immune system only study the chemicals within the immune system, cytokines, chemokines, and things like that. And most people who study hormones only study those hormones that are related to the system and those cells that are involved. But I had been at Hopkins and I had worked in a women's health clinic, and there were a lot of, unfortunately, young girls, but also young people who had cancer. And so what I wanted to understand is, okay, if we're getting sick, and we know that ovarian cancer, for instance, breast cancer, prostate, well, that's male, but prostate cancer and all these other cancers, that the hormones are impacting not only how the tumors are growing, but they must be impacting how the immune system is able to fight against the tumors. And so I purposely wanted to study dendritic cells, which is a type of immune cell, but understand how could hormones in ovarian cancer, in breast cancer, and other kinds of hormone-related cancers be impacting the ability of these immune cells to attack those cancer cells. So thank you for reminding me. I did forget that.
Very well explained. A student asked, and this is during the clinical trial perspective of your questions, and your answers. Do morals ever come into play when talking about clinical trials and when talking about the research component of them?
Say it again. Do what come into play?
Morals.
Are you kidding? Oh my goodness, yes. So, and maybe this question needs a little bit more clarification. So you're absolutely right. That's why. So one part of morality is safety, right? Like, you don't want to be experimenting on people if you're not sure that it's going to have some value to them. So you're right. There's morality around, like, should you be experimenting? And why are you experimenting? And how are you experimenting? Which is why I wanted to point out the first clinical trial that you do for any drug is about safety. Because if people are getting too sick from it, it's not worth it. So that is one level of morality. But I think, I'm not sure if you're asking about in general testing, and maybe you can put in the chat a little bit more detail on what morality means. But safety is part of that. It must be safe. And there are a lot of steps that go into making sure that our trials are safe and that we are monitoring how each person is doing to make sure that they're doing okay. And I think that that might be something that's not well known, is because you want to make sure that your drug isn't having a bad impact on somebody, that when you participate in a clinical trial, there is a lot more hands-on. How are you doing? What's going on? Please tell us. Because we absolutely need to know at every level exactly how safe it is. But I'm not sure if morality had to do with something else besides safety.
And I would have to definitely agree. Now, I have another question for you from a student, which is kind of reflecting back into high school. They wanted to know, what type of clinical work did you do in high school?
Yes, so my high school was one of medical professions. And so we would actually spend half the day working at the hospital. And so we would do rotations, very similar to what you do when you get to medical school. And those rotations would include, so at the time I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so I would always volunteer for the rotation in the animal facility. And so, but my advisors were like, look, you can't always be doing animal facility work. You have to be exposed to the other parts of research and doing this work. And so there was a clinic. I worked in a brain clinic. So we were doing EEGs. So I was putting those on. I also was participating in a lot of surgeries. And that's where I found out that I don't like bad smells. Let's see. So it probably would be equivalent to if Candy Stripers still exist. But I guess Candy Stripers just like would hand out the food or something, but we were literally shadowing the physicians. So I did everything that they did within reason. And I would learn about all of those procedures. So that was my clinical experience in high school. I will say that I had no idea that it was such a big deal at the time. I was just a kid, right? But now I'm really grateful that I was exposed at such a young age to doing clinical research. I was also working in the laboratory. I was also working in the animal facility. I was also working in the nurses unit. So I was exposed to a lot of different things in high school.
That's amazing. And then this is kind of going back to high school again, and it's reflecting. And I think we as instructors in the community lab would also be happy to address this. And the question is, how important do you think the classes you take and the grades you get in high school are to your career in science?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I told you that I did not like being different, there was a period of time where I purposely tried to fail, and it didn't work. So my teachers would make me do the work over again because they knew I knew. And so I wasn't at the top of my class, but I was up there. So it's kind of hard for me to answer this question because it's not like I had the kind of grades where I can do the experiment to say you can have less than a 2.0 and still be okay. However, what I will say, and this is probably my son who taught me this more than I learned this lesson, is your own personal trajectory has nothing to do with the classes that you take or the grades that you make. It's what you do outside of the classroom that really makes a difference. And I tell this story because my son and I had a discussion where he felt that it was wrong that you should depend on a college degree in order to advance your career. So he was determined to prove that you don't need a college degree. And his college actually funded him to start an app that showed that you can be proficient in what you do versus needing a degree. And so I never told him how much I admired him because I wanted him to get his degree. But to be quite honest, he was right. It doesn't matter what your grades are, it's whether or not you can do the job.
Right. And if I may also just kind of throw a little bit of insight there, it's that grades are one thing, but the interest level should also be there. If you're not interested and if you don't have that excitability or the excitement that it brings you, it's without a doubt, right, that you will either not do well, but also you don't know how to prepare yourself for that particular course. So just make sure you're very well aware of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's see, I have one more. Well, we have a lot more, so bear with me here, Cherie. Please share when you became comfortable with being the only Black person or only woman in a room or a group.
Comfortable. Okay. All right. So when I was, so this part of the story that I forgot to tell you is my mother decided that she didn't want to pay for a babysitter, so she put me in school early. And so my teachers had suspected for a long time that I was younger than I was. And it really comes out in high school. High school is where you realize you can't get your license because you're not old enough. You can't date because you're not old enough. You can't do a lot of things because you're not old enough. But when I was 13, so this was 9th grade, I was accepted into some program to go to Purdue University and take some college classes over the summer. And that's all fine and good. I didn't want to go, but fine. My parents were like, no, you're going. And so you get up there and summer programs, which you all know, there's a lot of different ones on college campuses. So there was another program that was going on at the time for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think most of them were from Gary, Indiana. And all of them look like me. And then there's me in my program, which was a biochemistry, we were taking biochemistry and all of these advanced science courses. And I'm the only one. And I kept trying to hang out with the kids in the other program. And they were like, no, we need you over here, because if you're the only one that tells them, it's more important for them to see you than for us to see you, because they need to know that we exist, that we're smart, that we can do just as well as they can. And I did not really want to hear that because I was 13, but I understood. Like at that moment, it really opened my eyes to, okay, you are in a unique position. So forget crying about being the only one and realize you are proving a point. You are dispelling a myth. That is a very important thing. And that was the lesson that those kids taught me, that every time I go somewhere and I'm the only one, I'm going to dispel every single myth that is on TV, that might be coming out of a faculty member's mouth, that might be a teacher making assumptions, because I'm going to show you just how smart Black people can be. So it became a challenge.
Very well put, very well put. And you're getting some claps in there, so it's very, very well put. Are there any good research opportunities for high school? I think that's a question for us. Cherie, if you can just go a little bit deep into the community lab, that'd be great. And then I'll be happy to just reinforce anything.
Yes, Alazar is king. So he will create all of the community lab opportunities. I think the hardest part, so number one, there are a lot of opportunities. And I really do encourage all of you to apply for all of them, because I recognize the fact that you're right. I was in high school and they actively put me into these programs, but Alazar and the community lab, they introduce you to these same concepts that I did when I was in high school. Even middle school, you guys have middle school students who are coming in and learning this. And we do have summer programs. We'll figure this out after the pandemic, but there are a lot of programs for high school students. Even at NIH, when I was in Maryland, we would have high school students who would come there. So please, please, please do explore these opportunities because they exist. A lot of college campuses will have them as well. But again, the community lab is very different because it's extending and it's helping you understand that the research that we do is meant to help people. And that's a very important part. To save lives, that's a big deal. That's a big job. But now you can, go ahead, Alisa.
All right, so we definitely have summer programs available through the community lab. So if you guys are definitely excited and or want to be a part of it, or if you have been a part of it, we definitely encourage you guys to also look for other opportunities. I think Cherie said it very well, which is there's opportunities everywhere, whether you're reaching out to us from North Carolina, I think I saw someone from Georgia, or even here in Massachusetts, you'll find opportunities for you. We're in a COVID pandemic and in a world where this may look like it's going to be different, but there are still opportunities. We've seen that. I think we are still hosting our community lab activities. If you're a teacher and you want to get some more information from us as well, our emails are, we will definitely post it somewhere, or just reach out to us. So it's literally alazar.ayala@biogen.com, alex.cameron@biogen.com. So feel free just to reach out to us and we'll definitely be able to put it in the chat as well. So
yeah, and I'm going to put in the chat. Oh, hey, Alazar. I'm going to put in the chat. There is a website where it has information about our summer program. That will be updated over about the next month because applications for our summer program are going to open in February. So feel free to check out that. Right now, that it's just kind of some general information, but over the next month, you'll see that website update to say like applications are open. Woohoo! And I'm also going to put, we have 2 community lab email addresses. I'm going to put those in the chat. If you're a North Carolina teacher, you can send it to the RTP community lab email address. That'll come to me. And if you're a Massachusetts teacher, you can send it to the other one. That'll be the Cambridge one. But I do want to say, I know that the pandemic is a little sad sometimes and opportunities seem like they're a little bit less, but we can also look at it that sometimes they're a little bit more. So because these things are virtual, you don't have to be in North Carolina or Massachusetts to participate in these things. So even if you're a teacher from outside of North Carolina and Massachusetts, if you're a student from outside of North Carolina and Massachusetts, still feel free to reach out to us because we can definitely include you in a lot of the virtual things, just like we're doing right now.
Alex, your Southern accent is music to my ears. Thank you.
You're welcome. Representing North Carolina here.
All right. So we have, I think, another question as well. So we have a lot of questions. How would you recommend getting into research as a high schooler?
Ask. I will tell you that I've had a lot of mentors and sponsors, and that was the biggest, that was the advice they would always give me. If you want something, you have to ask for it. Don't assume that people can read your mind. And you know what? If the first person says, I don't know, you go to 12 more until you get the answer that you're looking for. Because someone will eventually get you what you need, but you got to let people know.
Excellent. All right, so do you have any words of wisdom? I think as we start to culminate some more questions from these students, do you have any words of wisdom? What is something that I think helped you go through your entire process, both throughout your career, throughout your education? There must have been some kind of motto or some mantra or something that you followed that really helped you and encouraged you to be where you are. I think you also said something very important, which was, you know, you're sometimes the only person in the room. How does being the only person in the room, how do you kind of get through that? How do you kind of advance in that and then finish that meeting or finish that conference and then still feel very confident and comfortable to say you did the right thing? Like, what are those mottos and how does that interpersonal conversation end up?
Okay, so I'm going to take the first question because that was many, which has to do with my words of wisdom or advice, and they're twofold. Number one, I talked about my friends and my family. If you do not get anything else from this session, I want you to understand the importance of surrounding yourself with positive people. Surrounding yourself with people who will encourage you. Surrounding yourself with people who will say you can do it when you're telling yourself you cannot. Because that really does make or break you. If you're surrounded by people who say it can't be done, you can't do it, you're not worthy, then you know what? You're going to start thinking that of yourself. The second part of the same advice is to also make sure that you're surrounding yourself not only with positive people, but people who see more in you than you see in yourself. And that was a very important piece for me because I've done a lot of things that I never would have thought that I could do, but there was someone who said, no, you can do it. Just go ahead and try. It's okay. And the reason why it's important to be surrounded by people who are positive and encouraging you is because you're going to fall and you're going to fail. And you need someone to say, you're not broken. You're still a great person. It's fine. These things happen. Get up and go do it again.
Excellent. And a great timing too. If there are no more questions, Alex, Connor, Amanda, would you like to facilitate any other questions or do you have any thoughts you want to include?
I just saw one question that I thought maybe could be interesting that was in a group of ones, so it may have got missed. Someone asked, throughout your career, have you seen that there are more people that look like you, that there are more women and there are more Black people as we sort of progress? Have you seen that increase?
So you're right. It's very funny. I've been in organizations where all of us have the same story about being the only one, but now there's a bunch of us who are the only one where we are, but then we come together and we are a group. And that to me is a very important part of my own evolution, is recognizing that my story was not the only story. I was not the only one who felt isolated, and really addressing that. So part of what's really important to me right now is to help other individuals who look like me, who have my trajectory, who felt different, to know that it's okay and that being different really makes something better. And that is something that I've along the way recognized as I've done things that nobody else has done or very few people have done. And when I come into that, then I bring a different perspective and it makes things better because people hadn't thought about that. So now, yes, there's a lot more of myself, but I'm not going to say that like it's a majority. It's just a lot more. More than one is two.
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you is, how long have you been at Biogen, and what does that look like when you kind of develop your career, going from both the R&D perspective, going into the clinical, and where do you see yourself in the next 5, maybe 10 years?
That's a really hard question. So let me start a little bit backwards because I might not have captured everything. 5 to 10 years from now, that's a good question. I used to be one of those people who could tell you where I was going to the bathroom 10 years from now. But since I've been at Biogen, I've stopped trying to plan my future. And I've decided, let's see where things go. Because I'm getting introduced to things that I haven't done before, that I didn't even think I would be doing. And so it's very hard for me to tell you what I'll be doing 5 years from now, except to say, I bet you whatever it is, the job doesn't even exist right now.
Okay.
And then what was the earlier part? Let me make sure I answer that.
What was the earlier part of the question?
Right, because I answered the 5 to 10 years from now, but then there was a part before that.
So how long have you been here?
9 years.
How have you seen
Yes.
that, right?
So 9 years, so I've been here 9 years, and that was why I said, so I've been at Biogen for 9 years, but I will tell you that probably every 18 months to 2 years, I'm doing something different. And so I've been at the same company, but I feel like because I've had many different roles, I've been allowed to evolve as a person without changing my email address. So that's actually been part of the reason why I stay, is because I'm always being challenged with something different. And it makes me so satisfied to know I'm doing something different, something more impactful. Every time it has to be something more impactful than the last thing I was doing. And I've loved that.
Excellent. I think we have one, I think a very nice question, which is, have you experienced any advantages as a Black woman that others might not have?
Yes. So I'm not sure that, okay, this is a little bit facetious. I'm being a little bit funny, but I will say that when you're the only one, that means nobody knows what to expect, which means however you act, they think that's normal. And yes, I've taken advantage of that, because if you don't know what a Black woman acts like, then I get to do whatever I want to do. And I have done that sometimes. And I'm sure that some of the Biogen employees will tell you they see that too.
We'll wink at that one. There was this very generic question from a student, which is, do we work on COVID vaccines? I think we can straightforward say we don't work on vaccines. And then the other question is, why can't the COVID vaccine become a pill, or why can't we take a pill instead of a shot? Do you want to take a swing at that one, Cherie?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I did see that one come across. So when I was talking earlier about the decisions that you have to make in making a drug, is sometimes the way that the formulation, so how it is contained. Pills are usually not proteins the way that maybe a shot would be. And so you really do have to make a decision early on as to how are you going to fight, let's say in this instance, how are you going to fight a virus? And so a vaccine takes on a form that, to be quite honest, I don't think you can make it into a pill. But I say that, and I'm being cautious because one day somebody's going to prove that wrong. But the modality, which is like if it's a pill, if it's a shot, if it's, an injection, if it's the formulation is something that can be limiting depending on what kind of drug it is. So it's a really good question. And today I will say it can't be a pill, but tomorrow it might be. Somebody will figure it out.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Cherie, for being able to join us. I know that we have just about 5 minutes or so left, and we are so humbled by the fact that, we were able to share, I think, some of the most pivotal questions and addressing some of them. I think we put you on what we call the hot seat, and we truly appreciate you for doing that. None of these questions were rehearsed, so I really appreciate the fact that, we were getting the honest and the candor right off the bat. So thank you so much for your time. For everyone else who's on the call with us, we really appreciate you guys for coming and for joining us this evening. As you guys already know, starting every third Wednesday next month, we'll have another guest for you guys to come join us. We're hoping for it to be an international colleague, so as we are kind of starting to divvy up and start thinking about who we will have. And so please feel free to join us again. Our registration link will be sent out in the very same manner, whether it's coming from us here at North Carolina. For some of you guys who are interested, please feel free to send us an email. We'll be happy to put you on our registration link as well, so that we are also pumping out some emails that way. If there are any questions or anything like that, or any closing remarks from my team, please feel free to, interject here.
Oh, and then Elazar, do you want to share that video?
Yes, and there is a video link that I'll share in just a second. Give me 1 second here. Let me stop sharing my screen. I will be happy to share with you guys a very wonderful link that Cherie was able to share with me. So please feel free to watch this. This is a very wonderful video that I had a chance to actually watch, and it really, really is, I thought, very beautiful. So if you guys can watch it and enjoy it for a little bit, it's about, I think it's about an hour long, but you guys can sum it up. Cherie's part is from 9:26 to about 12 minutes. So feel free to go ahead and start watching that as well.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a good one and enjoy.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thank you, Cherie.
Thank you.